too long, I'll remember it.
Good. They'll be short, and we'll
Yes.
start pretty easy and gradually work into it. Okay, thanks for showing up, Father Devlin. When and where were you born?
What and where was I born? What doesn't sound right. I was born a human being. Where is, I was born in Dobbs Ferry, New York. That's a little town outside of New York. It's now part of New York City, practically speaking. Yes, I still can't handle that what, so you better rephrase that.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Sure, Jordan.
What we want to do is not to repeat the question, but restate it in your answer. So if he asks you, where were you born, we would like you to say, well, I was born
Yes,
in Jersey City. Or
yeah. All right, that
Okay.
can be done.
You always do that. You say, can you repeat the question?
Yes, thank you, Bill. Thank you,
okay.
Bill.
Restate it in the answer.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Jordan. No,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yes, well, that sounds good.
Sorry about that. I'm not an English major, so so we're not.
Oh, I
too
just didn't get the sense of the what.
Okay.
Anyway,
Oh, okay. Okay. Where did you attend grammar and high school?
I'm sorry?
Where did you attend grammar and high school?
Oh, grammar I attended in Holy Name School in New York City, and high school was Xavier High School in New York.
Okay. And where did you attend college?
College, well, in the order, we went to Georgetown, so I attended college in Georgetown. Yes, that's the way our degrees, our credits come from Georgetown.
Okay. Can you tell me the process for training a Jesuit through Georgetown, for example?
Is there some process for training a Jesuit? Yes, but it's standard. It's pretty much followed in the other groups in the church, the other orders, religious or whatever they're called. And our process starts, you know, with a novitiate where you're introduced into the spirituals and the history of the order, whatever it is. And then you go on to a juniorate, which is a fancy name for a college, the regular first 2 years of college, the classics and so forth. As we go into the classics a good deal, the Jesuits do especially, in our schools. We still maintain some area where the classics are treated and encouraged. So you get 2 years of working with the Latin and Greek authors, and then after that you move on to philosophy, which in my day took 3 years. And after the philosophy, which we spent at a place called Woodstock College in Baltimore, Maryland, in the area of Baltimore, we had a very large piece of property there, which is called Woodstock College. And we generally, after that, where was I? Was I philosophy?
I think so. Yes.
I think I was in philosophy, yes. Then they send us out to put some of it to practice by teaching our young rascals in every college or high school that we teach in. And we spend generally a couple of years teaching, maybe as many as 3, I'm trying to recall now. I was fortunate enough to be tapped to go to Europe for studies in languages, so I only spent 1 year on the Regency, and then I spent several summers at Fordham University getting ready for the thing, and then I went to Germany and spent several years in Germany working for a degree in German literature.
Very good. So what is your, is German your special field of academic study? And the
German would be, yes. It's a field in which I've been able to garner a good degree, I think, at Humboldt University, which is called Berlin University now. And they were recovering from the war, but apparently they kept their universities going as long as they could before they were either bombed out of existence or before the faculty was simply drafted into the war. So Berlin, since it was the capital of the country, they kept and protected that one pretty much right up to the very end. Then the professors were actually captured by the Russians. So the Russians figured they had something good here, so they brought them back to Moscow or other big cities and since they were good teachers and some of them could speak Russian, the Russians just took over their services. I don't know if they paid them much, but they were very happy to have them teach, and so they kept up their professional work. And the Russians themselves have a very fine reputation in languages, of course, in Europe, and in sciences and things like that.
Did you find a strong Jesuit spirit when you were in Germany?
A strong Jesuit spirit. That would be hard to identify. If you mean in the communities and so forth that were functioning at the time, I would say generally yes. Probably no different from any other order. The preparation of the students was the same, and then as they advanced along the various roads, the various phases of their education, through the philosophy, through the classics first, through the philosophy, and then through their teaching period, and then their theology. There are 4 years theology in those days. So I would say they kept that system pretty well. It had worked very well for centuries. There was really no reason to change it much, so it's been successful and still followed basically today. They go to different places at different times in their studies, but it's basically the same.
Very good. Okay, so we'll come back to the United States. When did you start teaching at St. Peter's College?
Oh, I can't remember really. I guess it was 60. I guess it was 60, yes, 1960. I'd come over, been in the Army in Europe, and had started my studies over there. I went back. The superiors were kind enough to let me go back. They needed me here, so after about 2 years of study in Germany, they invited me to come here, and I started in. But as soon as there was any space at all on the program, they let me go back to Europe and continue and finish my studies, which I did, teaching here part-time and then studying over there. The Germans were good about that too. They dealt with a lot of college-type people, people going into universities, so they made that as easy as they could. They made that they facilitated that as much as they could.
Great. When did you finish your degree in Germany?
Oh, that dragged on, as it does in Europe. So I'd say that I finished it about 15 years ago.
And did you teach at St. Peter's full-time after that?
I taught, yes, full-time for many years. Starting in 60, I can remember that, and going on through the various changes that took place as St. Peter's College expanded, and the teaching load became a little heavier. There were more students to teach, and sometimes one might say the quality of the students, as one would expect when one expands rather rapidly as we did in those days, the quality of the students sometimes lapsed a wee bit. When you had a smaller group, you could be more selective, and of course that made for better production and better degrees and so on. But we'd like to say that the admitting of more students really did not affect the quality of the teaching and so on. We still were regarded as a very satisfactory small college, and I use that word in a technical sense, a certain number, 2,000, 3,000, I'm not aware, I'm not exact on that. But we remained quite, our reputation is still retained here, and we have a number of students that do come to us from other cities and areas.
Very good. Okay, what was your, what did you hope to accomplish once you started your affiliation with St. Peter's College, either on a professional level or as on a teaching level?
Yes, what did I want to accomplish?
Yes.
Stay employed, number one. Fortunately, that was achieved because we did have the protection that we get from being just bounced out of the job. We have the various American Association of University Professors, AAUP protections, which the college has been quite good and in respecting and so on. So I suppose I wanted to become a fairly respectable language teacher. And another feature that the college was very good in to me was the allowing me to proceed with my editing and authoring of a number of articles and then several books which I was able to produce. So that, of course, was due to their kindness in many ways, because there are many colleges where the poor old professor is so burdened with things to do that he doesn't get a chance to write till he's quite elderly, and sometimes then he just dies, as die we all will.
Okay.
Yes.
Moving on. Tell me about some of these periodicals or books that you've written.
Excuse me?
What are some of the books or periodicals that you've
Yes.
written?
Well, I wrote, to go to the books first, I wrote a book on Johann Wolfgang Goethe, the great poet and literary man. I wrote also on a Jesuit of the 1600s, Jacob Gretzer, who was a great schoolman in Germany and had a lot to do with the developing of the modern school system, as is followed pretty much in the Jesuit system. But of course, we didn't create these things. The Jesuits simply borrowed from the best educators of the time. That was the system they followed. They chose to pick the best and choose the best as far as it suited our particular way of education, which would be basically humanistic with a religious overtone.
Okay. Have you written any articles for academic journals or any other?
Yes, for a number of German magazines. Many of the names escape me now. That was a good deal back, but some of them have continued until today. There is one in Berlin University. They sponsor it. They don't publish it, but they sponsor it. And I just unfortunately can't recall. It's a number of years since I actually wrote for them. Now, I might mention something that I'm not so sure if you know, but getting things published in higher universities and higher schools of learning, universities and that sort of thing, depends a lot on who your mentor is when you go through your studies. My mentor happened to be an extremely brilliant German professor, and Adelstein was his name, and he one of the qualities which later became very helpful for him was his ability to speak excellent English. I was so much superior to my English that I was ashamed. We usually spoke in German in the course, but there would be occasions when he'd lapse into English and so on. He was quite fluent, and he picked up a good job at UCLA, and he has been very helpful to me. He's assisted me, with the approval of our superiors here, to go over to Europe and to do some research work, and mainly on Goethe, and mainly on a work of Goethe's called the Italienische Reise. And I've done a little travel in Italy myself, just as Goethe did back in his day. And I've been able to write something on that particular work of his, which is quite well respected in Europe. Goethe was, as they were in his day, the early 1700s and so on, they liked to travel a lot. And usually the university you worked for wanted you to travel. And their idea was they get a little publicity when you come into town and give a lecture in some other country. And when you had the chance to publish something, you would, of course, mention them and so on, just as we do today. So many a would-be author, wrote a number of things like that which were sponsored by the local university for which he had studied. And that, since they had that custom they still have the custom going, I was fortunate enough to come under one of its aspects there. They were interested in the particular work that Goethe did on the Italian, on his Italian travels, which is translation of it basically.
Very good. Okay, getting back to St. Peter's, what were your first impressions of the college before you started teaching and just immediately after you
Well,
started?
before I start teaching of it, I hadn't heard much of it. Being in New York, things over in Jersey City at that time, they've changed now quite a bit. At that time, there wasn't, I had known it was one of the Jesuit colleges, having been brought up in the order, but I was more aware of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and of course Fordham University of New York, because there's where I was doing studies of some sort and eventually leading to the basic degrees that we got. So I had heard, however, that it had a fine reputation as a liberal arts college. That I heard not only in New York, I didn't hear it much there, but I did hear about that in Europe. When I was over in Europe, there were some people who were aware of it, German scholars in Berlin, and especially those that belonged to the Humboldt College of Berlin University, which was the classical college in those days. They still use the name Humboldt, but it said the college has expanded. I mean, the university, it's quite a large conglomerate now, just as Columbia University, New York City, and so on. Teaches just about everything.
So what was the first class title or classes you've taught at St. Peter's?
The first classes, I guess, were the elementary, because we had, I think it's a very good custom actually, it can be improved of course, but they would expose the students to an introduction of 1 or 2, it was 2 years in those days, in a language of their choice, often a language that they had worked on in high school, but sometimes, and we in the language department were sort of pushed them to make that a little easier for the students, that they would try a new language. And so eventually we developed our own languages, the different languages that we still teach here in St. Peter's College. But normally they'd go in for 1 or 2 years in those days. Now I think it's cut back to 1. But 2 years would be the elementary and the advanced level of a particular language. In fact, I might say that we were instrumental in bringing the Russian into our college. I think we were one of the first colleges. Now, I'm not comparing us to Columbia University or NYU or anything like that, but we were certainly one of the first colleges to bring Russian in. We had a few teachers that were quite good in that language, and it caught on. Many people thought it'd be very easy. Of course, they failed to realize that languages like Russian and then Polish, they thought. We brought Polish in at one time. It lasted for several years. Then, of course, it became difficult to get professors in Polish, and the literature and so forth is not as well known as German, French, Italian, and so on, though a very high quality, high standard, so that it faded after a while. But there were many people that thought, oh, that's easy, Polish. A lot of people speak that around here. They were quite deceived when they realized that you just couldn't speak it. You had to learn about it. You had to learn its grammar, its structure, and so forth, which tends to be somewhat complicated on the level of European, Eastern and Western European languages.
Did you teach any other languages here at St. Peter's?
Yes, we have the policy. Well, that's another little incident about the German background. German universities, and I think here in this country for the most part, require you to be a fairly fluent person in 2 languages. not just one, two. And usually they hoped those languages would be yoked together. An example of that might be French and German, because in history they were yoked together. Obviously French and Italian, German and Italian, German and Austrian. Austrian, by the way, aside from being a Germanic language, is also a cultural language with its own particular literature. So when you talk about Austrian literature, you're talking about something very specific. You might read a little Austrian literature in a German university, but it's quite recognized in its own right. And that was the situation when I was going there.
Okay, can you tell me, once you started at St. Peter's, what were your continuing impressions of the college in general?
Well, I'll be very honest, and fortunately positively honest. I thought that St. Peter's College managed, and I think that does credit to the services they began to offer as I stayed on here in my first 10 years, of going out and seeking students, making our message clear that there was such a college and that it was very convenient. Remember, this was before there was much boarding. Boarding in those days was strictly homes around. We had a list of them. Students that wanted to come from New York City or other cities were, for the most part, given these addresses and could find places. Later on, of course, we built the dormitories and we moved into that whole new area. And one of the services they do is to kind of place and locate the student. And also, to the great satisfaction of the parents, St. Peter's College has always kept an eye on the little rascals when they tended to get out of hand, as could happen in any college. After all, they're away from home, and they're on their own. And while we didn't and still don't, stick our nose into everything that concerns them, the whole idea is to kind of give them a sense of responsibility themselves. Still, there is a recognized interest in the students in the sense of their welfare and so on. And then the services that they offer to place them and locate them in studies and so on. They might come in thinking they were going to be the greatest doctor in the world, but it didn't take very long for them to realize, when they ran into such professors as Father Gruzik and a few others of the real toughies in the old days, that they had to learn their preparatory work in biology and in chemistry, Father St. George and others, Father Hilsdorf, of course, going further back. They began to realize that maybe medicine was not the best for them, and they could do just as well and much more profitably in business or something like that. So that's what generally happened. But there was this counseling going on that helped them to make that step. Not always easy, because a lot of times the young people were told to go into the college by their parents and to get a doctor's degree. Yes. Some of the parents, unfortunately, were not aware of a doctor's degree as an MD and a doctor's degree as a philosophical grade, which one has in the various faculties throughout the country.
Speaking of the little rascals, can you tell me about some of your memorable students in your first year and throughout the years at St. Peter's?
By name?
Well, you can give names and...
again, many of the better students that you've had experience with, names tend to skip you because they were rather self-effacing, as always happens with well, not always, but many times happens with intelligent people. Certainly, one of our young men that has done very well in the Jeff Wilmot, who has done very well in his field, which is advertising and business management and that kind of thing. And then there's Bill Hamill, who is an extremely good student and in a different job now, but certainly partly due to his language abilities, who works for the UN in Manhattan, in New York. And I could go through a number of them, but you know, names would fail me and so on. But we did have extraordinarily brilliant students. That is above and beyond the regular group that can earn the degree and so forth, and does go on to reasonably good work in the field. Many of them, of course, are not in a scholarly field. Many people go into a business and a general type of work that they can do outside. And you know, most colleges, the majority of their students, and I want to correct myself, most of the ordinary colleges, the non-university colleges. In Europe, a university college is something somewhat special, like Berlin University was, besides being a university, had a university college, and they were chosen to move in a certain area. They might have been in the area of sciences, or it might have been languages, as often is the case. So in that particular regard, well, St. Peter's itself has always had students who can do quite well. We somehow or other managed to get some extremely good students in the sense of devoted to a certain level, a certain echelon of work that they want to do. Since we inherit what we get from the state, from the country, from the municipality and so on, we're somewhat forced to take whatever the prevailing trend is, whatever the mode is. And many times the mode is, well, get out of college and get a job, you know, and forget all that stuff they told you about Horace and Cicero and Julius Caesar, and then the many wonderful European authors and things. That's good stuff when you're in college, but when you get out, you want to get a good job. Now, I think St. Peter's has impressed upon many of them the importance of following such likings, such preferences that they might have themselves, and it kind of does guide them on the way and help them to select things.
Speaking of the student body, what was it like to teach the first women's class in 1966 and onward after that?
Yes, that's a good question, because the answer is not very startling. You might expect a startling answer to that. Actually, we were very fortunate when we introduced the courses for women, the mixed courses, of course, because we got, in general, we got a kind of high-quality young lady, really, who had gone to some of these nuns' convents, St. Elizabeth's, and I can't think of them all, but they're certainly the Dominicans up here on the boulevard, St. Dominic's and St. Aidan's, and many other private schools which gave a very fine education to their young women. And so many of them came here because of our convenience in the area, and also because of the college's reputation in some of the areas that they were good at. And so they mingled. They mingled very well. Since they were, many of them are quite good in the German language. I wouldn't say many, but I would say some. And so they fitted in quite easily and quite readily. I wouldn't say that I had any particular difficulty with them at all. They, you know, knew that you know, we expected something from them, and they themselves were willing to do that. And they were very happy to move on to the next level of the language that they might have chosen. And I limit myself now here with you to just those experiences that I've had in the modern language department. There are many other professors in the college that would agree that they've had the same experience with the women when they first came here. Yes. There is something about the first level of a program. It tends to be exclusive in the good sense, and it intends to produce some really worthwhile products. As a program gets older and more people start scurrying into it for one reason or another, often without the slightest reference to whether it's going to benefit their intellectual life or whatever, then the program can get a little common and sort of lose its specificity, which we like to. I better take a drink of water after that one.
Okay.
Yes, after that, a program can lose a lot of its initial enthusiasm and so on. Then, as always, you have to depend on the individual professors to keep things going.
How about ethnic and such as African Americans, Hispanic students? How did they fit into the St. Peter's landscape in your mind?
Yes. Well, I would say the Hispanics, most of them, and I speak only for the Hispanics, I'm really not an expert on the Afro-American studies, and I will say in passing that before I get back to the Hispanics, that they set up a very good program here, and it went through its trouble stages back in the days of the strikes and things like that. They were very ambitious and wanted to take the 15th step before they had done the first 14. But that's human nature. That's been controlled now, and they move along so that one hardly, well, they mingle with all the classes. There's no special, there is Afro-American studies in the terms of literature and things like that. But those students mingle with all the rest, as we tried to do from the very beginning. But now to the, I was going to speak, I think, on the Hispanic students. The Hispanic students, many of them, and speaking only for them and not excluding others, but they came from poor background where to get a college education was something the parents had really struggled very hard for them to achieve. Consequently, the parents, kept an eye on where they were at night and made sure that they checked the examination results, and even from time to time would get in contact with the professor. They were not too strong on that because it's an area that they're not very familiar with. But they certainly, the Hispanic students, because of their background, their family background, they generally tried to work at the subject and appreciated any extra help they could get, so that it was for them, at least initially, not just any other subject that they had. It was something that, even though they might want to go on and be a doctor, they still found the language helpful because it gave them an area of communicating with so many great minds in the world, the intellectual world, and that attracted them. Now, that would certainly be true today, but with the development of student aid and things like that, there's much less need for the struggle on the part of the family. Consequently, the students are often not made aware of the real interest of their parents, but the parents figure that, well, they're being taken care of in the school and they know how to teach them this or that, and so as long as they don't get a note from the dean telling them they won't have to return for the next semester, they don't get too excited today about those things.
You mentioned the strike, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. The 1969 strike, what are some of your recollections of?
Oh, it was silly. It was just children reacting to first time away from home. There was an attempt on the part of some professors to make it sound very intellectual, this was really a stage in their growth. I don't think that too much was accomplished by the strikes. The sit-ins, where they'd occupy the president's quarters or whatever other departments that might be involved. But it sort of upset the routine. And and it upset the strikers themselves. Were a number of them extremely sincere, really wanting to get that experience and do something. But unfortunately, with a thing like that, it's like a ball game. You know, if the home team is doing well, everybody wants to go and see them. So everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon and strike. I don't think anything ever of any, I don't think, and that's just one person's opinion, that anything significant came out of the strikes. As you can see, education did profit from them, and I certainly want to make that clear, that we rarely have strikes anymore. These things can be broached around a table or with the proper authorities and worked out ahead of time. There have been movements to strike again, you know, over the years, but nothing seems to come from them because it can be worked out. And, you know, that's really part of the college, to teach them how to work things out, not just in the college environment, but also in their business environment and so forth, in their workplace and places where they might otherwise want to, in the very functioning of the unions. The unions themselves profit when you have intelligent people either directing them or as members, who will occasionally object to certain things and fight for certain things, but who will also recognize that, you know, it's a big stew. There are many hands reaching in to take advantage of the goodies in the pot.
Can you tell me about a typical class day or a day in the life of a professor, such as yourself at St. Peter's? How would you, when you were teaching, how did you break down your day?
And a typical class day would be to encounter the problem of absence, absenteeism. As I recall, through the years in St. Peter's, after it began to develop and to expand, I should say expand, that the problem of absenteeism began to be faced. There are many attractive things on campus that one could do, and going to a language class when one hadn't planned or prepared one's work was not the easiest thing, because the professors were quite aware of that and were insisting on just as much respect as any other subject, and rightly so, and so on. So the thing became difficult at times for the students. Once again, we seem to have weathered that particular stage in our development as a college, and that, of course, has happened in so many other colleges, not in any way peculiar to St. Peter's College. But the general tendency is to take things more seriously regarding studies now. The heyday of all the money being thrown around by the federal government has, of course, now starting to draw back to what the word I want to use is not as common as it used to be. The money is not there, and they're going to spend it on something they think important. And I think that the governor of the state is quite aware of that, and she seems to be of course, we don't benefit much from the state, but just in the general run of the colleges, like the public colleges in the area, they're cutting back a lot on some of the tremendous useless expenses they had in the past. And so I think everybody seems, as the development goes along, seems to recognize, as they once did in the early days of the country, that education is a very special gift. It's something that you have to take advantage of. It's not just there and go and show up and have some fun, cut the classes and all that. You know, occasionally cutting a class can be explained and so on. But in general, around here, I don't think it's a common experience that teachers have. There may be a special event that might come up. Well, all right. And a number of the students will let you know about that and say, all right, do you mind if I go? Well, generally, professor has no problem on that. So I don't think there's the class cutting phase was a developmental phase. But I think St. Peter's has passed through it fairly well, probably as well as most of the colleges in the area. And as I say, the goodies are not there in the amount that they were before. And even the public institutions are cutting back, such as the state of New Jersey colleges, the system, and so on.
How would you define your teaching philosophy?
How would I define my teaching philosophy? Well, like most professors, we were exposed to these courses in education, philosophy of education, and things like that, and very helpful and very necessary through the years of our preparation. We had that worked in along with the classics and the languages and others. How would I, therefore, explain my philosophy? Well, I suppose when I say I mean as a Jesuit, and we tend to be somewhat classically oriented. That is to say, the importance of the classics means a lot to us. And I would say that our educational spirit is based on that a certain liberty, a certain liberality in searching and finding answers, rather than accepting just somebody's word on it, or just what the book says. I would say that where you have a really active liberal arts program, you will find the young people are questioning a lot of things. You know what I mean? And it's not just accepting. Oh, of course, you'll always find a certain number of students that prefer to accept things the way it is in the book and not to challenge too much. That way they get through the course without flunking and things like that. But again, today we're becoming more aware of what education is all about, in the sense that to get the most out of it. Again, perfection is not what I'm saying is what we've achieved, but we're on our way towards it. By the very nature of the word, it's going to take a long while before we achieve it.
That's for sure. Father Devlin, can we run over a little bit, or after 5?
Well,
or,
I'd really, 5 o'clock I'd like to leave if I may. But I'll go and do the best I can. How about it? And
okay.
How about you?
How
about you punching out the questions, and perhaps we can...
Okay. Sorry, I don't mean to put
No,
pressure.
I mean that, I meant that, by the way, in the point of view of your own time schedule, yes.
Yes.
Okay. I could certainly go a little further, certainly.
Okay, but not much, though.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
That'd be fine.
Thank you
do
very
that.
much. Yeah,
Let's
I'll cut a lot out.
Yes, sure.
There's only about 10 more questions, if that.
Yes, fine. Then let's move on, and
Thank
whatever we can respond to as completely as we can.
Thank you. You're doing great so far. Have you been a moderator or advisor for any student-based organizations?
Yes, I think I've had my fair share of those things throughout my educational career. The German Club, to speak of St. Peter's College, which was one of the longest lasting of our clubs. It would fluctuate in number. It'd go up and down. You'd get maybe 3 or 4, and you'd get as many as 25 to 30 at times. But that would be an example. The German Club was something that I thoroughly enjoyed. And then, of course, we've had Latin clubs, which I've had some out of St. Peter's, which I've had some experience with. And then again, our junior year abroad, I was involved in that program when it first started here. It was something unusual in the area to spend a year abroad. Again, being a Jesuit, I had the advantage, that is the order had the advantage, that is the college, I think, of having faculty members that knew places in Europe where the students could live and where there was a certain interest taken in them. They just didn't go over and get drunk for 2 years, as has happened, I'm afraid, with some of our non-Catholic institutions. And I speak from experience. I especially think of when I had to get, he was a public school young man, very fine man. He turned out very nicely now. And anyway, I had to get the Cardinal of Vienna to dig him out of trouble with the local police. European police are much less flexible, if I may say that, than American police are, and so on. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on that. But your question before that was, or the question we were working on?
Yes, the student activities you've been
The
associated
student activities, yes. So the junior abroad would be one I was most happy to be part of, and did actually, through the kindness again of the college and the superiors, to be able to go over to Europe and set up some programs where the young people would be taken care of in houses of the order. That is, where they could board reasonably, and where someone would keep an eye on them as they went to the various colleges and universities over in those countries.
Okay, you mentioned before Father Gruzik and
Father who?
Gruzik, is that?
I didn't hear you.
Gruzik, Father Jerome.
Father Gruzik, yes, of course.
Thank you. Okay.
Grusik, I
Okay.
think it is, but I'm not an expert in the Polish language.
Yes, neither am I.
Yes.
Can you give me your impressions of some of the most memorable Jesuit teachers you've had as colleagues here?
Yes, well, since I didn't go to the college, I really have had none. If you come right down to it, I may have met them, but I never had them because
Right.
I come in from from the orders colleges, and that would be Georgetown and Fordham and the different courses and so on. But certainly, I think you might have been hoping to elicit some ideas about some of the outstanding professors we've had here. And I think St. Peter's College has had a number of fine professors. I think of John Hughes, and he was in the languages. Again, John Hughes created a fairly nice impression and had the cleverness to elicit a lot of response from his students without seeming to. Then there's such people as, well, I think of an administrator, Bob Howard, and his young folks have gone through this college. He was an extraordinary person there, and always encouraging the languages and so on. Trying to think, there's so many. The fact that I can't strum them all up on touch the button and I spat it out, since I'm not able to do that, I'm omitting many a fine teacher just because I can't recall the name. But certainly in our modern languages department, we have our own professors of language. Mrs. Pontrelli, Josefina Castan in the Spanish area, certainly were outstanding teachers and very devoted to their students. Many a night you'd see, well, certainly late afternoon, you'd come over to the modern language department and there'd be more than one teacher going over with students things that hadn't been quite clear or things where they had problems, offering their time pretty liberally beyond the call of duty. We were not a department inclined to hear the 3 o'clock bell or whatever it was and bust for the car. I mean, under the illusion we were avoiding the traffic. We probably were, the traffic of the students, but not the outside traffic. Yes, there are a number of fine, I speak only for the language department, although the other departments had scholars too, especially, not especially, but I think of the biology department. I think of the sciences as examples of extremely dedicated professors. First of all, the sciences themselves are not easy, and they are very demanding. And so you had to have teachers that were able to maintain the pressure in the good sense of the word on their students. Now, as I say, I think of Leo McLaughlin, who was the president here, and I think of Father Victor Yanatelli, who were administrators certainly, and each of them with a fine degree behind them, one in the French literature, that's Leo, and certainly Father Yanatelli was a scholar in Italian literature. So it was good to have administrators that had been through, were not professional administrators, oh, they were professional, but what I mean, they were not just administrators, that is, they just did administration. Maybe they had English, maybe they had French, whatever they had, didn't really make any difference in their present job. Now, we had administrators that were themselves scholars and could easily have fitted into any classroom any time, you know, in the development of their life. So certainly that was a blessing for St. Peter's College. And I might say, in general, for many non-public colleges, and speaking for the Society of Jesus, I would say that we had a great number of our administrators that were also quite learned in a variety of different things. Well, the priesthood itself, you take your philosophy and your theology. Not everybody gets that. 4 years of one, 3 years of the other, at least in my time. Not every student coming to St. Peter's, and even from very fine colleges of the area or throughout from the other states, they don't normally get that kind of thing. They get a lot of administrators who are quite efficient at jockeying the numbers around, finding how many people they can fit into this classroom, and so on, but not thoroughly carried away with their past experience in languages, in philosophy, theology, whatever the subject matter was. So we were lucky and are fortunate in this country, in the Jesuit educational system, that you have a lot of people doing the work of administrators with a real thrust because of their basic interest in the fine arts. And that's another thing I would come to. I meant fine arts, of course, but I meant in the liberal arts. As to the fine arts, of course, we have one of the finest institutes here, or whatever you want to, programs, I think would be the better word, you know, for art itself in all its phases, the studio and so forth. So that is, again, in the tradition of the Jesuit college and university. You have the interest in the fine arts, in painting, in sculpture, in studying these things. For many students, their exposure to the fine arts is by way of books and by way of lectures. But there is a number right here in the college that are really working on to be professional artists, sculptors, painters, art appreciation and that stuff. So we're very fortunate here in St. Peter's College. It's the kind of thing that might well have, if we didn't have administrators that themselves had been trained in the fine arts and in the liberal arts, it's the kind of thing that might have been sort of put on the back burner. As I think there are colleges where art is not really, might be an exposure to art, but there's very little else done in practicing the art. We have practicing artists on our faculty, and tremendous advantage, I think, for St. Peter's College.
Very good. Okay, well, we'll try to wind it down now. Okay, I'm going to tell you a name of a president, and you give me your impressions of...
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay, I'm going to give you a name of a president of St. Peter's, and you just give me your impressions of him. Father James Shanahan.
Well, I can't give you much of an impression of Father Shanahan, because he had left when I arrived, or was leaving. He was certainly close to going.
Okay, Father Edward Clark.
Yes, Father Edward Clark, a good man, a man inclined to work very hard in his area. I think Ed Clark has gone on to Fordham, am I correct? And he, certainly at the time that he was here when St. Peter's College was just spreading its wings, very important man, Clark. And one of the qualities about Clark was his ability to have you come in any time, more or less, and talk about things that were bothering you and so on. as the college began to expand and grow in numbers, he was a good man to have. He sort of kept things together for a while, till he moved on, until others came to follow him.
How about Father Leo McLaughlin? You touched upon him.
Father Leo McLaughlin always impressed me, and I think selfishly from our department. Leo McLaughlin had an excellent degree in French literature. I won't attempt to, it's a European degree that is that's certainly above the average PhD you get in this country. And Leo himself had a great interest in the French language. And he was he was a cultured man. And that again, as the college began to expand, with a staff like that where they had been not just exposed to some language, but where it was really part of them. And Leo would on occasion hop off somewhere and give lectures in his field. You know, as president of St. Peter's, yes, but also as a practicing liberal arts professor. And they kept the two that you've mentioned, kept their interest in the field alive. Leo did some articles in his early years as the college expanded. The time for that thing, became rather restricted. But then again, don't forget I mentioned that he, as did, the two of them, and we could add Father Yanatelli too, that would get out and give a lecture here or there. They'd be invited, to places in the state of New Jersey and other areas where they'd go out and in their field. They give these lectures in their field. That's a tradition that many universities have in Europe, where the president, who happens to be also an expert in some language or whatever, he gets out to present his professional skills, not just as an administrator, but as someone that is also a doctorate and a good background in a language, a particular language.
Okay, do you have any Father Vic stories?
Father Vic stories, no. I always got along. Again, there was another man who, like Leo McLaughlin, liked the languages. And so, therefore, in a sense, we could do no harm. But I never got to know all of them very personally. They had their job that keeps them very busy. As I mentioned before, they're on the road a lot and so on. So it's if you went in to see them, of course, the two I mentioned certainly would give you, their time and their expertise. But beyond that, I couldn't say. In Father Yanatelli's case, he was, and so did McLaughlin. They used to visit the department once in a while, and that was good. It sort of gave the teachers a sense that we're doing something worthwhile. Yes.
Okay, Father Glynn.
Mm-hmm.
Father Glynn.
Father Glynn, yes, administrator, number one, but a devoted administrator. Glynn, of course, had a good background in theology, which not everybody seems to know, but he was quite brilliant in his field. But as an administrator, he was, what's the word I want to use? Down to brass tacks. He knew the ups and downs, the ins and outs, the costs, the needs, and the trends. And he studied on it. He worked at it. He didn't, had ability, of course, but he worked at it. I think Glynn, for his particular talents, was a good administrator here and did a lot to move the college forward. He was he was one of the ones that were holding office when the college began to expand more notably from a small liberal arts college, and I use small not in the professional sense, small in the sense that we didn't have that many students, to the growing St. Peter's, which we are now, to the growth we've obtained now. in the sense of a small, the technical sense, liberal arts school at 2,000 or 3,000 or whatever we are. Yes.
Okay. There's only a few more questions. Father Degnan.
Father Degnan. Yes, Father Degnan. Again, an administrator that we benefited a great deal, speaking of the modern languages, who was quite willing to, I recall, there was some discussion, I can't remember the details, about cutting back on the faculty of our department, and Degnan stood up for the department quite clearly. Again, being a man with a legal background, he was quite aware, you know, of the ins and outs of various proposals. So Degnan was a good man to handle and to have. I'm afraid my voice may not make it.
Do you need a drink? Or?
No, yes, thank you. But Degnan was valuable because he had a legal mind, and he knew the ins and outs that every college president should know, and in general, most of them do. Most colleges always select a man because of his ability in law. If the man happens to have law and they choose him, that's one of the the word I want to use, one of the qualities they seek in a president is knowledge of law. In general, I mean. Of course, you can get fined. In Europe, it doesn't seem that way. In Europe, they go more for the skills that he might have in literature, science, whatever the particular thing, mathematics, and so on, biology, whatnot. But in this country, they want, generally they seem to like presidents that have knowledge of law.
About Father Logren, winding it up.
Father Logren, Jim Logren, yes. A man who saw an aspect of the college that's extremely important, and with Father Logren came the development of the boarding facilities, which made St. Peter's College available to many students from out of state that might otherwise not have found it possible. I mentioned earlier on that they had the old system before these men came in, and where you would find homes in the area. There'd be a list of homes where experience indicated that the students would be cared for reasonably and what have you. Then as we gradually expanded, and under Logren, of course, we came to the development of the boarding schools, which is so important today for your colleges. It's hardly possible to think of a college today where you don't have boarding facilities, you know, on the grounds. And we're gradually moving ahead. We're certainly not reaching the end of our effort, but we've made a great, under Logren, we've developed a great deal of boarding facilities. And because of that, we have a number of students, not only from other states of the United States, but even from Europe. We have a certain, you know, for our size and everything, a very respectable number of foreign students. South America, we can certainly mention. Less from Europe, but certainly South America. I don't want to step too deeply into that area since I don't know too much about it.
Okay, no problem. Two more questions. The experience, how would you define and say the value of a Jesuit education at St. Peter's? How would you say how valuable it is?
Well, there again, you pick somebody that's been brought up in it all these years. Others may or may not have the same feeling that are non-Jesuits. But I would say that essentially what it does is it takes a liberal arts education and it adds the real, R-E-A-L, real in the German sense, it adds a sense of religion, without which a liberal arts education has no meaning, because it's precisely in man's aspirations and abilities to communicate with God. in religion, whatever the religion is, and I say in general, all right. Nonetheless, that's an important development in the human personality, to develop their religious instincts. I think St. Peter's College does a fine job, you know, to the best that they can in these areas and so on. Not pushing any one religion over the other, but recognizing the importance of religion in a liberal arts tradition. In Europe, it's part and parcel of the whole thing, the religion and the studies of religion, along with the along with the actual practice of the religion and so on. Now that might be another case. How many of them practice the religion? Well, I'm afraid I'd blush if I knew the exact number, but at any rate, they're exposed to it, and that's all you can ask. An institution such as a college.
Okay, the last one. What would you say would be your how valuable was the overall St. Peter's experience for you? And
How overall what?
St. Peter's experience for you and for those who may be viewing this.
And for those who what?
May be viewing this. Just your advice on
Yeah, yes. It's just a question of hearing it. You do have a soft voice.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. Your questions are very well taken, by the way. I'd like to say that.
Okay.
As I get to the end of this, I'm beginning to forget. What were we discussing at this moment?
Okay, this is just a general, just
impression.
Just summing it up. What your
advice would be to someone who's viewing this?
Who's viewing this particular program?
Yes.
in terms of St. Peter's College?
Well, I would, assuming there'd be other people that are going to take part in this eventually as you develop the thing, I would say that it does give you, at least as I recalled, and since I hadn't been told to prepare anything for this, I have to go back to see what I had been talking about, and I think I centered, as I should, on the value of the liberal arts education. I think one should know something about liberal arts education in order to discuss a college like St. Peter's, in order to want to come to the college like St. Peter's. It's not an athletic institution. It's not a law school. It's not, fancy pottery and all that kind of thing. It's a liberal arts college, and that, by its very nature, demands a certain reaction. It's a type of thing where basically to be acquainted with the liberal arts and to follow through on their spirit is going to take a great deal of effort. Now, some students may do that more easily than others, but certainly all of the people that get the liberal arts education have to work at it and will come out of it with something. So that's what I would say. It probably is the best type of education, and I'm not just saying St. Peter's College, but I'm saying for all liberal arts institutions across the United States, it's probably one of the most effective. It's one of the oldest, and probably one of the most effective ways of training, in the good sense of training, in intellectual habits. That's what I meant.
Good, excellent. That's a wrap.
That's it?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Well, thank you. I enjoyed.
Don't move before he takes the
Okay,
microphone. We don't want you to choke yourself.
Yes, all right.
Father Devlin,
Yes,
thank you very
much
much
for taking that off. I would have walked right out, dragged it across, and ruined the whole machine.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank
for
you.
taking the
I
time.
enjoyed speaking to you and very happy to
Pleasure.
come over. If I can be of any assistance in any way,
No
just call on me.
I think I sent you this before, but here's an extra questionnaire, just in case, if you have time to fill it out.
Yes, I will, and I'm glad you did send it because it's again, I know you did send it, and I'll tell you that immediately.
Yeah.
And where it is now, I don't know, but I will.